Welcome, everyone, to episode number 5 of Plan to Protect with Melodie Bissell, the safest podcast on the internet. As you already know, my name is Amanda Kelly. I'm the junior risk consultant at Plan to Protect, as well as the host of these weekly podcasts, where we'll be tackling topics of safety with a focus on achieving the highest standard of abuse prevention and protection for that vulnerable sector. What you may not know about me is I'm also a mother of a 2-year-old, and she captures my heart every single day. She's the most important thing about me. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to be making a little bit of a shift today. We're going to be addressing mostly parents and caregivers. Our podcasts are designed generally for parents, caregivers, program leaders, and senior leaders of organizations that service that vulnerable sector. And once again, we have Melodie Bissell back with us. She's the president and CEO of Plan to Protect and the expert in all things protection. Melodie is an author, aspiring speaker, blogger, and now podcaster. But Melodie says that her greatest accomplishment is raising her 3 children. So, hi again, Melodie. Do you
I
ever miss those days when your children were young?
I love being a mom of young kids. I love being a mother. I stayed home with my children when they were young and only returned to work when my youngest was in kindergarten. But I can remember when I was at home with my children, it was a lot of work. It was tiring. There were times that I felt like I didn't have 5 minutes to myself. I'd even lock myself in the restroom to take a deep breath at times. I'm so glad those days are over. Though I am looking forward to having a grandbaby in our home soon. I think it would be really, really difficult to parent young children during 2020 in the midst of a pandemic.
It is. It really, really is. And when I say tired, it's honestly an understatement. I can really identify with the parents that are struggling through this time right now. I'm lacking a lot of sleep and a lot of personal time. I don't honestly think I've had a proper night's sleep since this whole thing began in March.
Oh, Amanda, I feel your pain, but you inspire me, especially during COVID-19. You have been juggling working full time, caring for your daughter. This week you were even dog sitting. You recently moved into a new home that you bought, and you're planning a wedding. You're really amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I can't say that it's been easy. I've been wanting to pull my hair out most days. But, I feel like parents today really are dealing with a lot of things on their plates. Parenting during COVID-19, I feel like among millions of other parents, there's really this one huge, huge question on our minds. And that's what I think we should tackle today is the question, are you sending kids back to school or if you have a toddler into daycare? So, Melodie, what would you personally do if your children were still young? What would be the advice that you would give?
Well, it's hard to put myself into someone else's shoes, but I can think of a time when we lived in Austria. My children were young. I had 3 children under the age of 4. I had no family nearby at all. My husband at the time was working in refugee settlement, providing programs for refugees that were in transition, living in refugee camps near Vienna. With our 3 children under the age of 4, sometimes he would be working 50 to 60 hours a week. So if we wanted to spend time with him, we would have to go to the center and hang out with him there. My mental state back then was pretty fragile. I think similar to many parents today. I can remember one time saying, I'd have a nervous breakdown, but I don't have time. Initially, I can remember being pretty fearful about leaving the house in a country I didn't know the language and heading over to the refugee camp, potentially exposing my children to germs, diseases, and many, many strangers. It took me great courage to decide what was best for myself and for my children, both emotionally, socially, and physically. What was best for us was for me to leave the house. I eventually decided that my children would be richer for the experience of being with people from around the world. The refugees loved them. My young 3-month-old baby was handed, I can remember her being handed from person to person in a room of 75 refugees, mostly men. I can remember being packed in this room, watching my children laughing, smiling, being jostled and hugged by so many strangers. I'd be in deep conversation with people, but my eagle eyes were on my children every second. But I don't know what I would do today if I was put in the same position.
Yeah, and it's a really big challenge right now for parents. We're trying to decide whether we keep our children at home or if we do school online, homeschool, or put them back into their daycare or even, hire a caregiver, sending them to family members. Actually, for some parents, what we've been seeing is that they've been doing these things called learning pods, which I would say they're quite high risk, and we will touch on that in a minute. But what are you thinking, Melody?
Yeah, these are such big decisions. And when my children were young, we weren't fighting a pandemic, but we did decide we would make sacrifices so that I could be home with the children. I can remember we postponed purchasing a house. We only had one car, and I did childcare at home. There was a period of time I was caring for 7 children under the age of 6. I started a small business of caring for kids in my home. Even then, I was committed to doing it right, ensure that I was really protecting those kids. Even when I approached it as an entrepreneur, it was fun and so worth it for my own children even. How are you making the decision, Amanda? I know we've had some conversations about this. Your daughter was in daycare prior to COVID. You worked in daycare, so you know what happens within daycares in the past. Any concerns about sending your daughter back to daycare?
To be honest, I could rant about this for hours and hours. Myself, I've had so many concerns. My daughter, thankfully, she's really been thriving regardless of what environment she's in, whether that be in daycare or even at home. She's kind of blossomed into this social butterfly. But it was a really tough transition to actually keep her home. Of course, it was the safest, and with everything closing down, it was really the only option that we had. And now I feel like parents are kind of being thrown into this like panic mode. We're having to make these uninformed decisions in a really, really short period of time. So it's like looking at it, is it safe for her to go back to daycare, when we know that they're operating at full capacity? Or what would that look like for her mental health when being kept separate from her friends? Is that going to hinder her development? Seeing her not being able to sing, which is one of her favorite things to do, not being able to be held when she needs comfort. But then alternatively, there's, going back to work and whether or not her development will be impacted, by another transition. Or then, there's the potential of a second wave and then possibly having to pull her back out and what that would look like. Honestly, it's just absolute madness. I don't even know where to begin. My head is just going 100 miles a minute with trying to make this kind of decision. I really, really feel for the parents that are facing this right now because it's not an easy decision. I know that over the last couple of weeks you've been doing quite a bit of research. So, would you be able to share to our audience what kind of information that you found?
Yeah. I actually did a study among parents on 4 different social media platforms. I asked 4 questions. What decision have you made as a family about sending your child back to school or daycare? Number 2, what swayed you to make that decision versus the other options? What fears accompanied that decision? And number 4, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, how confident are you with your decision? So I received about 20 responses back from parents representing 30 children. 6 children were under the age of 5, 6 were in primary school, 8 were in junior intermediate, and 10 were in high school. The group was split 50-50 as to whether they were sending their children back to school versus staying at home. Of those staying at home, 70% were going to do school online, and 30% were opting to do homeschool. When asked what swayed their decision, some of them indicated that it was the lack of the plan or the ability or inability to reverse their decision if they found out they needed to send their children to school. Others said the offer of extended family members that offered to assist them as the reason for keeping their children at home. A few said they were sending their children back to school as their employers were calling them back to work. The primary deciding factors for the decisions they were making, including for sending their children back to school, were primarily based on the desire for social engagement for their children. One parent said, "My child needs to be in school." The children desperately were missing their friends and interaction and stimulating activities. A few of the parents said that the last 6 months were very difficult, similar to what you were saying, Amanda. Their children were not provided adequate teacher engagement, resources, feedback from teachers, and the learning was not conducive to their children doing it online. They noted their children were becoming lethargic, lazy, and even non-responsive. One parent indicated that it would be easier to reverse this decision than to have their child stay at home and not be able to change their mind until the new school year. The confusing messages from the government and the school also helped sway some of the parents to have their children stay at home, as they do not feel the board and the schools have a viable plan yet that is in the best interest of their children. One parent said, "I don't want my child to be a guinea pig." Interestingly, 30% of the parents that reached out to me self-disclosed that their children had special needs. Of these, almost 80% are sending their children back to school. One has a son that is in a high risk category for contracting the pandemic and having more severe impact from it. I can understand where parents are at in struggling with this decision. I have spoken to 3 of my principal friends and 1 caretaker, and so far they've all told me that either they have received no communication yet or very cumbersome communication as to what school will look like in just 2 or 3 weeks from now. 2 of my family members that are teachers are being called back to work, and they're going because they find doing teaching online very, very difficult, and they really desperately miss the kids. The fears parents voiced for not sending their children to school included the fear of the second wave, similar to what you said, not having a consistent teacher, um, concerns about having their children have to be stationary all day with little movement and having to wear a mask all day. The final question I asked the parents was, where is their comfort level with the decision they are making? Interestingly, the high school parents of high schoolers, their confidence level and comfort level was a 4.7 out of 5. Those in daycare and JK and SK had an average score of 4 out of 5, meaning they're very comfortable. Those in primary and junior intermediate had the lowest confidence score in the decision they were making, and that was at about a 2.8. One mom said that she was very confident as she does not have the patience to be able to deal with her children and do schooling with them. Probably one of the most impactful comments I received was one parent said, "I'm confident with my decision, but I have overall frustration that our children collectively are like a big experiment on whether this is going to work out or not, and that's concerning."
And that's really, really hard to hear because with all of this being so rushed, they are kind of going into sort of this pilot project. But I think it's really important for each parent to know that your decisions and reasoning are going to look vastly different because everyone's children are different. But it's so important to make sure that you are your child's advocate across everything. You should absolutely be advocating for what you believe is right for your child. So, Melody, for parents that haven't quite come across a decision, if they're going back and forth, not totally sure about what they should do, Would you be able to give us some guidance on maybe steps that they could take to help make that decision? I think you made an acrostic for us, right?
I did make an acrostic, and I think that this will help whether you've made a decision already or you're in the process of making a decision. We'll put a link in the show notes as to further expand on some of the ideas I'm providing you. But the first one is my acrostic is the word aim, okay? Aim, AIM, aim. The first one is ask the right questions. Whatever you decide, if you're going to use a learning pod or you're sending your kids back to school, sending them to family members or friends, or even having them at home, ask yourself some questions. And some of those questions include, what are all my options? What's the strength of each option? What is the weakness of each option? Um, Also asking questions about what are the risks associated. Don't just think about the risk of the pandemic and the spread of germs, but what are all the risks? Because as you and I both said, with these learning pods that are popping up all over the place, there are huge risks about entrusting your children into the care of a stranger that has not been screened and trained and professionally educated to be able to deliver and support your child's education. Also ask questions about, can I financially afford to stay at home? Am I being required to return to the workplace? Have I gone and done a site visit of where this is going to be? Don't send your children back to school until you actually go and look at the school and see what these rooms are going to be, the setup of them. The same thing with the learning pod or even with family members and friends. Is there going to be real good supervision and oversight? That's another good question to ask. And is there insurance in place? There's huge liability risks with some of these options that people are looking into.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you said that because it does bring up a lot of risks, regardless of the choice that a parent does make, if they keep their kid at home or if they do put them back into programming or whatever that looks like. I mentioned some of these earlier, like your child's development. So, children thrive on routine. So, have you been able to keep up with your child's routine? Has that gone out the window with working from home and trying to balance that? Or how will they react if you are comfortable placing them back into programming? Can you ease the transition and what that looks like, make it a little bit easier for them? Or what would it look like if a second wave hits and you have to pull them out again? There are some things that I found to be really, really unanswered, and that's what the actual risk is to the child and how this affects their development, as well as what will happen when a second wave hits or if a second wave hits, because that's something that is pretty widely unknown. But then there are also things such as, a parent's mental health and wellness, because that's important too. I'm sure for those that do have the children at home, it's been really, really stressful. I know for me, I've had more breakdowns than I'd like to admit. But you need to be able to balance your own self-care with having your child at home if that's the decision that you do make. Alternatively, would you be comfortable putting your child back into program, or would that cause more uncertainty and anxiety? And then aside from these points, you're also looking at there's a very prevalent risk of abuse for children that are kept home in unsafe households. That's been hitting the news quite often lately because it also makes it harder for others to identify any indicators of abuse. Are all parents able to continue to provide the necessities of living for their child, especially if maybe you're out of work or if you're not sure if you'd be able to afford it to put your child back into care and what that looks like? There's even liability, especially if you're participating in a learning pod and something happens. So if the individuals haven't done their due diligence, if they haven't been properly screened, there's not proper supervision and something happens, what might that look like? Or if there's an outbreak at your school and daycare, what would that look like? There's illness, as parents, I'm sure we're all very well aware of how often our children are getting sick when interacting with other children. almost every single day. My daughter would come back with either a cough or a runny nose. It was much more often that she had something than when she didn't. So, to make an informed decision, we really need to know what all of those risks are, what they look like, how they're going to affect us, how they affect our children. But knowing all of this, what should we be doing or what resources could we be looking for to get the information to make that decision and actually be really confident in it?
Well, I think the next acrostic will help here. So we said ask the questions, and I is implement your plan. So in the process of implementing, you have to think of all the human resources and physical resources that you need to implement that plan. So get the help you need. This is a time for you to ask for help. It really is. So don't, this weekend I found that I was frantic about something. I was feeling the pressure, I was feeling the anxiety about something. But I sat down and I spent some time meditating and thinking, and for me, praying. And then I just made a to do list. And I reached out and I communicated my concerns, I communicated my questions, and I communicated my timeline. And I got great responses back from those that I sent the emails to. So I would say implement your plan by pooling your resources. Get the help you need to make whatever your plan is happen. And that might be speaking to family members, reaching out to your employer, to your friends, to other family members, community resources, technology, teachers, and professionals. And then, whatever your plan is, make sure you don't drop the ball on being proactive in protection. That doesn't mean just making sure you've got enough masks for your children to wear, but to make sure that you have screened and trained, you've vetted all the people that you're going to be entrusting your children into the care of. I recently saw a post on Facebook where a parent said, I want to be part of a learning pod. Are there 4 other families that will do this with me? We'll all take 1 day a week. And to me, it's just like advertising to put your child in the care of a complete stranger 4 days a week. Please, if you're going to use learning pods, then have it be with family and friends that you know, people that are well trusted within your community. Make sure you do screening, check their references, do a criminal background check. There is so little accountability and so much isolation in this kind of setting. So please pool your resources. Make sure that you don't drop the ball on being really proactive in who you entrust your child into the care of. Make sure that there are policies and procedures in place so that everyone is doing everything the same way, so that it is really a conducive environment to learn for your children and to provide care for your children.
Okay, so you've noted now that there is a lot of prep work to be able to even be putting programming in place or whether you're going to be doing these learning pods and what that looks like. So then I would assume that you launch, but then would you just cross your fingers and hope it goes well, or what would you be doing then?
Well, I would want there to be a lot of monitoring. That's my M word, monitor. Ask questions, implement your plan, and then monitor your plan. Monitor your child's physical health on a regular basis. Monitor their emotional health and your emotional health. As Amanda said, just putting your children in the home of a stranger may end up causing more anxiety for you. So make sure that you're monitoring everyone's health and wellness. Monitor their growth. Ask for regular feedback for your children. I often will encourage some of our clients that plan to protect, not only for parents, not only to say, was my child good today or bad today, but what did my children learn today? What was the highlights of the day? How much did they accomplish? How did they interact with the other children? Was there any time during the day that they were crying or upset or seemed anxious or fearful? So you want to monitor their growth, but you also want feedback, whether you're using a teacher, a child care worker, or other parents. Make sure that you get feedback. And then find ways for you to be in the same room with your children. Um, for online engagement, this is something that we've really been coaching our clients about, is that if you have children under the age of 13 and they're online, you should be in the same room with your children online. They shouldn't be in the bedroom. They shouldn't be in a separate room of the house. You want to be monitoring them online at all time, as there's a lot of risks for minors to be online. That is like this playground that is filled with people that are very, very unsafe. Monitor for predators. And similar to what I did when I was in a room full of strangers, and my children were being passed from person to person, you want to keep your eyes peeled at all time. Be on the alert. And as I often say to my family and friends, as a parent, I would shoot up arrow prayers all the time, praying for the safety of my children.
So then, what if you make a decision, or a parent makes a decision for whether they're going to keep their child home or put them in a learning pod or send them back? What happens? What if you end up with regrets?
Oh, Amanda, as a parent, there will be regrets. You will have regrets in your life. As a parent, I made some really, really good choices, and I made some poor choices. But you know what? My children have grown up to be really good people who care for others, and they love their communities, and they're really good citizens. There were times that I was not always a good role model, and I made some bad decisions, but I would apologize. And I would apologize to my child. I would tell them if I had made a decision that was selfish or self centered or short fused or even fearful. Sometimes we make decisions based on fear. Perhaps it was short sighted, or I was making decisions because I was being way too overprotective, or I was being judgmental. And in those cases, I was pretty transparent with my kids, and I did apologize. They've heard me apologize many, many times for being short sighted or fearful.
I think actually those would be some really good topics for another day on the interactions with your own children and accountability and what that looks like. So, thank you, Melody, for providing us with a very thorough look at the kinds of decisions that parents are facing today and what that might look like. Do you have any final words for the parents?
I would say, Amanda, I would say to the parents out there, you've got this. There are amazing educators and child care workers out there that are taking tremendous care and attention to providing safe environments for your children. I know some of these are our clients, and we've been helping them to prepare for your children's return now for months. Have confidence to aim, ask the right questions, implement your plan, and then monitor your decision closely. And then launch. You've got this.
I think I can speak for the other parents as well in saying this, but I think we really appreciate the kind of confidence that you have in us, that we should have in each other, and that we should also have for our own choices. So, in closing, I just want to say that this podcast is sponsored by a new initiative that we're taking on. It's our Plan to Protect parent page on Facebook and on Instagram. And we also have a parent resource page. We will pop all of those links below. So we really encourage you to check it out. It might help you really make those decisions and feel empowered to do that. So don't forget to tell your family, friends, schools, churches, and community partners about these podcasts and about Plan to Protect, because we really want to be able to help you to make these really important decisions and to also be putting in place these really safe environments. So, without further ado, I would like to say thank you so much for tuning in today. We hope you've learned something, and we can't wait to see you again next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.